This next painting that we're going to be doing, I'm going to let you use more natural colors, earth tones. So that's going to be colors that come from anything that you can kind of relate to earth. So browns, and any kind of combination of browns, blues, greens, even to oranges and reds. So there's not a whole lot of violet that happens in nature. Of course, sunsets work, and flowers, but more earth tones, think of trees, grass, rocks, dirt. So you're going to be using a lot more browns and greens and blues. Okay? So this is going to be more of an earth tone color palette. There's lots of different color schemes you can try. We've learned about triadic and analogous. So I'm just trying to show you different ways to use color. Ultimately, you can decide what you want to do, but I'm going to use more earth tones for this one. For this painting, we're going to be doing clouds. I'm going to teach you a lift technique to create clouds. Last time we did just a gradated wash, changing from one color to another, starting with the lighter color and then adding a darker color on top. So this one we're going to do with a lift technique. So I'm going to create my blue for the sky, and you could do different colors. For the sky, I'm going to kind of create a teal color just for something visually a little more interesting. It's kind of boring when you always use the blue straight from your container. It becomes really expected, and it's kind of boring, because if everybody does that, then everybody's sky is the same color. But if you just take a little time to create your own unique color, that's going to create a little bit more visually interesting painting. So just like before with the gradated wash, we're going to start with wetting the paper. And you can see I didn't pre-draw for this one. I'm going to show you that you don't have to. We're going to keep the idea of using 2/3 sky, so that gives you room to practice your clouds. So you can see I kind of stopped the water right here. You might be able to see that there's a little shine. Okay? When that shine starts to go matte, then the water is absorbing that paper, and it might move differently. The paint might move differently if it's drying. So you do want to try to make sure that when you start doing a wet and wet technique like this, that you are kind of ready. Your paint is ready to go, that you've established your kind of color so that you can just keep adding your paint. Now what do I have to do in order for this to move? I actually have to tilt. I have to pick this up. Sometimes artists like to put like a pencil or a box or a book or something underneath their board to help move this around. So I just like picking up my board. Sometimes I'll put like a roll of tape underneath my board just to prop it just a little bit, which is kind of helpful. Okay. Now before I move on, you want to just make sure if you wanted to add a little bit of green in there just to make it a little more teal. You get that darker color kind of at the top. That kind of gets the idea that it's maybe at twilight, where it's just starting to darken. Skyline is a little lighter. Remember, I'm just kind of helping pull that color down, tilting the board, and moving my brush from left to right. Right to left, it doesn't matter. Just help moving that paint down. Now if you go back and touch it up, you might get a light spot. You kind of lifted that color off. Having this puddle down here, you can get rid of that so that it accidentally doesn't move on you. You can either thirsty brush or use a tissue to lift it. Either one is a lifting technique. Sometimes using the tissue gives you texture, whereas the brush can kind of give you more of a smooth effect. If you left that little puddle there, it's just going to kind of dry a little darker as you saw the color puddle. Okay, so I'm going to start doing the lift technique. So I'm taking my tissue, and because it's still really wet, I can dab and pull that up. Now it's not about creating perfect similar shapes. Keep variety. Maybe pat lighter so it doesn't pick as much up, so it looks like a cloud that's maybe a little farther away. Pat darker, or keep patting in an area so that it lifts up more. Clouds tend to kind of go, I mean, there's lots of different shapes of clouds, but if you kind of keep them a little bit more puffy, that tends to read a little bit more like cloud. And even when it's starting to fade a little bit, still go ahead and the color isn't that intense, still lift it. All right, so you can kind of see that lighter value. And clouds sometimes have a little shadow as well. There might be just a slightly darker value on that shadow, or on the cloud. So I'm going to make just a little darker value, adding maybe just a touch of brown or black. Very, very little, because I don't want to make it look too dark. So I'm just going to dab, and all I'm doing is kind of giving it three-dimensional form. I'm kind of including a little bit of a shadow. So keep it loose, meaning don't get too patterned, don't make too big of a mark. Keep it small marks, little dabs. And think of the shadow being on the bottom of the cloud. And that will kind of help the viewer understand that that's the shadow. So I'm adding a lot of water to that shade that I created, so it is quite light, low intensity, so it doesn't get too aggressive, too strong. Now if it gets a little dark, you can pat it, you can lift, use the lift technique to kind of lighten it up. So those are my clouds. If you see that the paint is kind of coming back into those areas you lifted, maybe you're using too much water, you could go back and try to relift. It's not going to always work as good as it will when you first do it. So in this painting, the cloud shadows are way too dark, so we don't want to do that. You want to keep it subtle. So I'm going to call that good for the trees, or I'm sorry, for the clouds. I can add some trees next. Think about how we did that for the last painting, keeping it kind of loose and low intensity, so water mixed in. And I still am kind of using the blues and the greens, keeping the marks kind of small. Here I can show you how to do kind of an evergreen. You kind of have a center part to that tree and then branches that come out from it. So I'm going to use it either on the side, use the side of my brush, or use a smaller brush and kind of dab it in this triangular fashion. And because it's so far in the distance, it's okay if it doesn't have a whole lot of value change, but it just shouldn't be high intensity. I'm thinking of just like a basic triangular shape. The more water you use, the more it's going to kind of bleed and blend, and the farther away it's going to appear. If you want a tree to look closer, you just have to wait a little bit and let it dry, and then come back on top of it and add your paint. So I'll let those be, and then I'll show you after it dries a little bit. I can bring back in to create a little bit darker. Okay, so I'm going to keep the marks loose like I did in the last one. I'm going to create kind of a mid-ground with small marks. Trying to use some similar colors, this blue, green, brown color scheme, so I'm going to pull in some brown. I'm kind of doing really thin lines to kind of medium lines, getting a little thicker, and then in the front they're going to be larger marks. of gets the effect of snow when you leave white gaps between. Some people don't like that, so you could wait till it's dry and maybe put a light tint of green if you want to make it look more like grass. Or right now maybe it looks a little bit like water, since I'm using blues, more blue in my paint right now. So that could be cool too if you wanted to think of this as being like on a lake. Okay. If you wanted to try the Sgraffito technique again, here's a perfect chance for you. Maybe these are some reeds. Sometimes I like to go back in after it's dry and maybe paint like cattails or bring in some greens. Okay. If the salt didn't work the first time, you know, you can try it again now. So just sprinkle a little bit of salt there. We're going to call that good and let it be. Wait for it to dry, and you can always come back and do some touch-up things after it's been dried.